In the spring of 480 BCE, a great king crossed the sea. Before him lay the land of Hellas, a mosaic of city-states proud and free. He brought armies, bridges over the Hellespont, warships, and ambition. But among the tales of battle and conquest, there lies a darker story, one of violation and moral collapse. What the king did to the daughters of Hellas was worse than you might imagine. Xerxes was the son of Darius the Great, crowned king of kings of the Achaemenid Empire in 486 BCE. He inherited a vast realm stretching from the Indus to the Nile, from the Caucasus to the deserts of Arabia. But his father's campaign in Greece had ended in a stinging defeat at Marathon. Xerxes would not let that rest. He vowed to march into Hellas, to subjugate its cities, and to secure his legacy. He crossed the Hellespont with hundreds of thousands of soldiers, built massive bridges of ships, and scorned the sea when it dared to damage his works. Power, ambition, and hubris converged. Against this backdrop, the fate of the daughters of Hellas, the women of Greece and the Greek world in general, would be tragically caught in his wake. In the autumn of 480 BCE, after victories at Thermopylae and Artemisium, the Persian army descended on Attica. Athens was sacked. Entire regions were burned. But during the fury of war, violence seldom differentiates between soldiers and civilians, between men and women. The daughters of Hellas, mothers, sisters, wives, daughters, were swept into the storm. Their homes plundered, their sanctuaries violated, their freedoms imperiled. The Greek sources don't always detail every atrocity, but when we look beyond the battlefield, we see the consequences of empire, the silencing of voices, the collapse of social protections, forced migrations, and fear. Other stories hint at even more personal violations, compelling evidence that the conquest of Hellas was not simply a clash of armies, but an assault on the dignity of its people. While the war in Greece raged, back in the Persian court, the king's behavior toward women reveals the moral cost of unchecked power. The Greek historian Herodotus records a dramatic episode. Xerxes' brother Mecistes had a wife and daughter. The king took an interest in the wife. When rebuffed, he arranged for his son to marry the daughter. Then, pursuing his lust, he made the daughter his own lover. When Queen Amestris discovered this, she retaliated, not against the daughter, but against the mother. The punishment was savage, the mutilation of her ears, tongue, nose, and breasts. What does this tell us? That the king who invaded Hellas wielded power recklessly, even toward his own family. If he could violate morality within his court, what might he have done in war? The violence unleashed wasn't only physical and military, it was moral and symbolic. In the historical record, we often focus on the battles, Thermopylae, Salamis, Plataea. But the unseen crimes, the subjugation of women, the severing of social roots, the terror induced in civilian life, tell a critical story. For the daughters of Hellas, defeat meant more than losing territory. It meant losing safety. It meant being subject to the conqueror's will, vulnerable to harassment, becoming victims of plunder, or worse. Greek sources hint that when your city falls, you are no longer simply a citizen. You might become spoil. In many ancient wars, women were taken as captives, forced into slavery, or exploited. While we don't always have named records of each woman in Greece subjected to this by Xerxes, the precedent and possibilities are chilling. The moral is clear. The war against Hellas was a war on its people, and its daughters paid a terrible price. When Xerxes withdrew, defeated, humiliated by the Greek fleet at Salamis, and ultimately by the allied Greek forces at Plataea, Hellas survived. But the wounds remained. The stories of cities burned, of liberty imperiled, of women whose lives were upended. They echo through history. For modern viewers, the story of Xerxes and Hellas isn't just about the clash of empires. It's about the moral consequences of conquest, how power dehumanizes, how war erases dignity, how women and civilians suffer when warriors think only of glory. For the daughters of Hellas, it meant stepping into a world where their value was measured in plunder, not in personhood. Today we remember the battles, but let us also remember the hidden stories. The women, the children, the civilians whose suffering is often a footnote. Because the story of Xerxes' invasion teaches us that when we ignore the dignity of people, we erode our own humanity. When we celebrate conquest but ignore its cost, we perpetuate injustice. Hellas endured. The spirit of the Greek city-states survived. But the daughters of Hellas carry a legacy of resilience, of loss, of silent suffering. We pay tribute not only to the Spartan warriors at Thermopylae, but to those whose names we will never know. The mothers and daughters of Hellas who suffered because a king thought himself divine. What Xerxes did to the daughters of Hellas was worse than many believe, and maybe worse than was ever truly recorded. If this story moved you, consider how we remember history, and how many voices remain unheard. Like this video, and subscribe for more stories from hidden history. Leave a comment with yes if you believe dignity matters. And if you're moved, share this story with someone who needs to know. Because remembering the daughters of Hellas is more than history, it's humanity.